preserve quality of life, social justice, best management practices. You hear that a lot up here in the mountains. Endangered species, invasive species, regional. Regional is a key word I'll talk about more in the second half. Historic preservation. Now we have this chart at our back table, and we have a table in the back. You can pick up a copy of it if you want to see the rest of those terms. You see, Agenda 21 rarely calls itself by that name. Instead, these warm and fuzzy terms are what are being used in communities across America. Now, the first time the term sustainable development was used that I've been able to find was by Woodrow Wilson while he was president. Now, there's no loss of irony that the man who brought us the Federal Reserve, the income tax, the League of Nations, and the war to end all wars would introduce America to the concept which today is a synonym for world governance. Now, supporters of the Agenda 21 use a mantra illustrated by what they call the 3E pattern. The 3 E's represent a summarization of Agenda 21's blueprint. The oft-repeated 3E concept looks and works like this. Equity, sometimes called social, but equity means the use of sociology and the remake of the law in order to re-engineer humanity. Economy, which means the international redistribution of America's wealth, and we certainly by now all know that that is the case. And it also means the replacement of free enterprise and its corollary, private property, with government-business partnerships. The third E is the environment. But by environment, they mean nature over man. The grandest threat posed by globalism is the Agenda 21 Sustainable Development Global to Local Action Plan. This is where the rubber meets the road. This is why the defense of America begins in your neighborhood, your hometown, and the broader community. Recognition of this fact will compel ordinary American people to gain control of school boards, fire boards, the sheriff's office, water boards, city councils, and county board of supervisors. When Agenda 21 policy has been expunged from every element of the public sphere in a county, that place and those that follow will lead America's recovery as the home of the brave and the land of the free. Amador is off to a great start. Now, it's important to understand that Agenda 21 is not a left versus right fight. In what I call the contemporary dialectic, or bringing a green global cartel to America, we have the left, the collectivist one world left, bringing to our society the principles of social justice, that is basically a communist form of justice, and environmentalism. And from the right, we have the collectivist one world activists who are all over Washington, D.C., bringing to us government-business partnerships, essentially right-wing fascism. It is the combination of those forces, and only the combination of those forces, that requires both sides to contribute down and create sustainable development. And sustainable development, when that program is fully achieved, is a government-controlled society, and we all live in the tyranny that follows. Our need as American citizens is to understand how both sides of the contrived political spectrum contribute to the globalist action plan. Now let's contrast the American philosophy of individual rights and the globalist philosophy of community rights. In America, our rights are said to be individual. The source is in the writings of our Declaration of Independence, where the purpose of government is to protect the natural or unalienable rights of each individual. That all men are created equal and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Well, we can contrast that with the notion of community rights, which are set out in the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. There, the purpose of government is to control the individual for the greater good of a global community. In Article 29, subsection C of that document, it says the following, quote, "Rights and freedoms may be in no case exercised contrary to the purposes and principles of the United Nations." You see, there's no notion of unalienable rights. The final say is what the UN says. In other words, government grants your rights, government restricts your rights, or it withdraws your rights according to government's needs. You and the product of your work belong to the community. Contrast that with the American system, where you're born with an acknowledgement that your rights are natural to you, and that government exists for one reason, and that reason is to protect those rights. Accordingly, you and the product of your labor belong to you. The judicial system that protects individual rights is based on the principle of freedom called equal justice. Now, equal justice supports true diversity, a respect for the independence and unalienable rights of the individual, and genuine tolerance for individuality. Equal justice puts a checkmate on mob rule. A system of human rights or community rights operates with the pursuit of social justice, which can be defined as law formulated to obtain government's social objectives at the expense of individual liberty. The Sustainable Development Agenda is based on the principle that the collective good is more important than individual rights. This is in direct opposition to the principle of equal justice. Equal justice is the wonder within mankind's greatest achievement. And that achievement was the American Declaration of Independence. Now, there are three broad principles that underlie Agenda 21. The first is the step-by-step program for the abolition of private property. The second is education for global citizenship. Do you think the notion of unalienable rights is presented in today's schools? Take notice of the number of young sustainablers working in this county, many of whom identify themselves as global citizens. Universities are building a fifth column for sustainability, an army of young college graduates. For even younger people, there are the policies and assessments of No Child Left Behind, all geared to neuter the next generation's understanding of liberty and of the American experience and experiment. Now, the third driving principle of Agenda 21 is control over human action. For instance, we see technological advances used by government to monitor the individual. We see this happening through federal legislation that is directing biometric identification of Americans displayed on their state driver's licenses. We see the advent of cameras everywhere, and of government-accessible databases that have everything about you that you now think is private information. Let me focus my comments on the efforts to abolish private property concerning land. But first, what is private property? Well, private property includes your person. Your thoughts are your private property. And your relationship to some things are your private property. By relationship, I mean the power to use and enjoy that thing. It's the relationship that reflects the idea of private property. Private property can only exist where unalienable rights are recognized. The key is all men are created equal, and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. America is the only place where, if only for a brief shining moment, unalienable rights have been politically recognized. Now they are being ignored. As America implements Agenda 21's two land use programs called Smart Growth and the Wildlands Network, recognition of unalienable rights is obliterated. Let me explain these programs with the help of this well-visited map. Let me define a couple of terms. First, wildlands. Wildlands means the removal of people and the prohibition of resource extraction. If you're in Montana, you can't mine. If you're in the Sierras or if you're in Montana, you can't cut down trees. The areas that are intended as wildland designations are covered in red. The wildland areas is to be void of people. The yellow areas are buffers to the wildlands where public-private partners will engage in limited and controlled activities. Amador County is a buffer to the Sierra wildlands. Smart growth is the stacking and packing of human beings in dense cities where people will depend on public transportation rather than automobility. In the words of a smart growth advocate, it will be the people, and make this clear, a smart growth advocate said, quote, "It will be the people in cages with the animals roaming freely." Smart growth areas, also referred to by the UN as human settlements, are demonstrated by the black dots. Now, communities like this, you won't see any black dots along the Sierras. You know, it's in the Bay Area, Los Angeles area, East Coast, a couple of spots in the Midwest. But what the smart growth they're talking about here is to create the kind of management community for the buffer areas. Remember, all species are of equal value, so the purpose of people living here will be to facilitate the migration patterns of wild animals from the Sierras to the coast. That's why you see the red lines flowing through California. We'll see a closer map of California later on. This next webpage is from Resource Roundup, which is a research tool for citizens. On this page, a map created by the Wildlands Network, formerly called the Wildlands Project, shows the thrust of the wildland set aside. The Wildlands Network states that it wants to rewild 50% of America, but in actuality it is not about rewilding, whatever that might mean, but about removing humans from the landscape. So this graphic is one of the many maps from the Wildland Project website that show the plan for the country. The wide arrowed areas show lands that the Wildlands Project once set aside for animals, especially reintroduced large predators. You can understand the problems they're having in Missouri and Colorado and Wyoming with wolves. But you can also see that there's a finger of this big Yukon to Yucatan wildland corridor stretching the length of the continent, as it has a finger coming off to pick up the Sierras. Now I want to switch tune a little bit and talk about the North American Union and the Trans-Texas Corridor. The Trans-Texas Corridor is a major component in the creation of a North American Union. The corridor facilitates the political equalization of Mexico, Canada, and the United States through the establishment of trade routes, toll roads, utility lines, and inland ports. These systems are to be developed, managed, and owned by various multinational corporations working in public-private partnership with governments. You can see the corridor begins in the central of Mexico, comes up through the Texas border, all the way through the United States and into Canada. It has branches coming off, including Highway 5 in California. Goods are offloaded from China here. They come in without duty or inspection, get offloaded by a Mexican council in Kansas City, while it then proceeds for distribution through the United States. You know, the goal under the Earth Charter is the equalization within and between nations. This is why American manufacturing has been decimated. This is why unemployment is high, and it's going to get worse. Because if Americans live beyond the status of Mexican peasants, we simply are not in harmony with the world. This is what our political parties are taking to. This isn't an offshore fight. This is a fight happening right here in the United States, and to date, we've been sold out by our leaders. Now, in order to meet the global equalization objectives of the economic E of sustainable development, it requires global management of trade directed by the World Trade Organization, pursuant to policy created by the World Bank. This system of managed trade necessitates bringing down American production and middle-class standards of living to a world standard, similar to the European Union. The North American Union calls for an eventual merger of countries, in this case Canada, Mexico, and the U.S. By design, this leads to regional governance that sacrifices our unalienable rights and our national sovereignty. I'm going to point to three circumstances for which the United States Constitution is totally responsible. These three circumstances are the underpinnings of blowing up the American constitutional system of government. The first constitutional breach undertaken by Congress is the federal ownership and or management of broad landscapes. Implementation of the Wildlands Network is a violation of Article 1, which deals with the legislative branch, Section 8, which deals with the legislative powers of the United States Constitution. Now, constitutional authority for federal land ownership is set out in Article 1, Section 8. To exercise exclusive legislation in all cases whatsoever over such district, talking about D.C., not exceeding 10 miles square, to become seat of the government of the United States and to exercise like authority over all places purchased by the consent of the legislator of the state in which the same shall be. 4, here's the limiting condition. 4, the erection of forts, magazines, arsenals, dockyards, and other needful buildings. Well, where's the mention of a need or authority for creating the Department of Interior or the Department of Agriculture, which then in part holds millions of acres across the U.S., including most of the Sierras? There is no mention of a need or authority for creating the Department of Interior or for the creating of massive wildland zonings anywhere in America. There is no authorization for the federal land ownership or contemporary wildland bills that have been processed by Congress. The Constitution was written to protect the unalienable rights of the people, not to abrogate them. So who is Congress working for? There's a war on the American ideals, and Congress is on the wrong side. Remember, government powers are granted under the Constitution. They cannot just be taken by a narrow mob with political frontmen seeking power and control over resources, and yet that is exactly what is happening. Defaulting to federal authority in the area of land and resource management is a huge mistake. Government parks should be determined and owned by states and/or local governments. There is no federal authority for ownership and management of parks and the resources they hold. Now, a second congressional breach of constitutional responsibilities is the delegation of trade policy to international institutions. Congress has delegated authority over U.S. trade policy to the World Trade Organization and to various multilateral trade pact organizations. This necessarily comes at the expense of sovereignty. The effects of surrendering trade policy control include a disintegrating border. For example, the NAFTA agreement calls for a 200-kilometer wide international zone of cooperation straddling the southern border. There's no trade border there. It's an international zone of cooperation. Also, constitutional taxing authority under Article 1, Section 9 becomes neutered. The constitutionally intended form of taxation, known as indirect taxation, consists primarily of import and excise duties, which are lost to the World Trade Organization's so-called free trade requirements. It is not free trade that is being implemented. It is a managed global trade control that is being exercised over America. This policy is designed to economically equalize nations in accordance with the Earth Charter principle, to equalize wealth within and between nations. American industries are lost to this globalization process. Average American earner wages are reduced toward global norms. And multinational corporations profit from the cheap, often slave labor found overseas. A massive profit arrangement is protected by the World Bank from American duties. Domestic production is sacrificed. The American balance sheet is destroyed, and America sinks. Now, the designs of global managed free trade include multinational corporate control in partnership with various world government agencies, and that has happened. The redistribution of America's wealth, well, that's why we're the greatest creditor nation in the country, and is designed to neuter American sovereignty. The modern trade regime results in manufacturing job losses, starting with a shuttling of resource extraction activity. The consequence has been production leaves the U.S., finished goods are then imported, often from slave labor countries, always concentrating wealth into the hands of global business partners of prospective world government while draining off American capital. Prince Charles established the Sustainable Business Council with major multinational businesses, led by British Petroleum. You see, globalist corporate coordination has occurred. American trade policy must again become American-made. America cannot surrender its trade-making power and remain a sovereign nation. American involvement in the World Bank organization is designed to destroy the nation. The sustainable program is more than green. Now, another long-standing abrogation of Congress's constitutional responsibilities is the delegation of its monetary responsibilities to a globalist system of central banks, which results in a loss of a constitutional and honest monetary system. This is another congressional breach of Article 1, Section 8. This time it regards the establishment and maintenance of a central banking within a world system of central banking, the indispensable ingredient for creating world government. Congress has no authority to delegate an exclusive monetary system authority to a third party, and that is exactly, though, what happens when a central bank like the Federal Reserve is formed. This accounts for at least the financial dilemma, the financial aspect of the dilemma that we face. The existence of central banks, like the Federal Reserve, allows for the printing of money necessary to fund the globalist movement while accounting for its creation as debt owing from us. The monetary system is designed to cause a financial collapse, which allows the opportunity to further consolidate and strengthen globalist power. America will need a new monetary system. But today we must simply understand this issue if we are to avoid becoming trapped in an arranged future that has little regard for human life. The collapse of the monetary system appears to be in process now. Let's observe two facts. One, a pattern begins to take form. The federal government has become an outpost of globalist authority. Now the real muscle is being applied where it counts, and that is in your community. Now we have a place, though, where we can effectively fight and defeat the grandest assault on liberty where it matters most, and that is in your hometown. As government prohibits resource extraction on much of the American landscape, America has become dependent on other countries for almost everything. This causes the interdependency that our children are told is designed to naturally lead to world government. But let us set our sights. We need to recover our ability to use our resources. And to achieve this, we need to cause federal lands to become state property or private property. We need an American-centered trade policy, and we must abolish the current fiat monetary system. The American people's goal must be to recapture the federal government. But how do we do that? Not easily. To get there, the battle that we can and must win is the local battle. Win back your town, neighborhood, and county from Agenda 21 policies, then move into a broader area. Ultimately, we need to combine with others working similarly around our state. Then kick sustainable development policy out of California's law and out of our bureaucracy. When enough states have recaptured their citizens' liberty, the federal government can be taken on effectively. Then we will have salvaged the American experiment in individual liberty and equal justice, including the political recognition of every individual's unalienable rights. Long live the United States. Now, as Congress conjures up what they call a living constitution, the pros in Washington, D.C. are selling out America. We don't have all that much time. Remember when American youth, many of us were, taught that it was a good thing that power was not centralized and coordinated? Oh, I wish it were still that way. It needs to become that way. We need to restore the American Republic, not a 15th century landscape. We need to expose sustainable development. We're going to take a very short break. And when we return, I'm going to talk about the local implementation of sustainable development here in Amador and surrounding counties. So that's the best part. Take a few minutes, go to the bathroom if you have to. We'll start again in 5 minutes.
Hold on.